Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Really appreciate it. We're about to hear from some fairly legendary entrepreneurs who have built very large businesses, not just today, but in previous times of uncertainty as well. So really excited for that. A little bit about us. We're Acceleprise. We sit at the nexus of technology and innovation. So we deal with very, very early stage companies and the corporations whose problems they're solving. So that consists of an accelerator arm where we help businesses and founders get off the ground, and a couple investment funds where we invest in growing businesses, and then a corporate innovation team where we sit within big corporates and help them solve today's problems using today's technology. And to that end, I'd like to introduce our head of corporate partnerships, Olivia O'Sullivan.
Thanks, Jonah. Happy Tuesday, everyone. As Jonah mentioned, I'm Olivia, and I'm the head of corporate innovation and partnerships at Acceleprise. So what does that mean? I get to support founders in working with large companies and help make enterprise companies more easily and cost effectively innovate and drive growth by tapping into startups and external ecosystems. We really have an incredible night in store for all of you. I want to say a quick thank you to all of our partners, Accenture, Zendesk, Brex, Pulse Q&A, and Early Growth for making tonight happen. And before we bring on our keynote speakers for this evening, I'm going to be moderating a quick panel that brings together incredible perspectives from both startup founders and corporate innovators. Uncertainty is really abound in the business world today, and organizations need to learn how to not only adapt, but really foster new opportunities. So without further ado, please welcome our panelists this evening. Joining us from San Francisco, Amanda Greenberg, co-founder and CEO of Balloon, the world's first insight mobility platform. From New York, we have Andrew Stroup, founder of Leverage, an intelligent supply chain management platform, and founder and executive director of N95, the national COVID-19 clearinghouse for PPE and critical equipment. From Toronto, we have Bocar Dia, founder of A-Player, enabling sales teams to be productive in a high growth environment. And from New York City, we have Jeanne Jang, head of ventures and lab at E-Trade, a mission that she founded where she's enabling E-Trade to create new businesses and solutions across digital and emerging technology. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thanks, Olivia.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So before we dive in, let's start with some quick introductions. Tell us who you are, what you're working on, and how that may have changed or shifted over the last few months with everything that's happening in the world. Andrew, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Andrew Stroup, founder of Leverage and also now executive director of Project N95. The bad joke about me is I was made in Korea and raised in cowboy boots, which is a very confusing place to be in all aspects of life. But have had various different professional adventures up and down the East and West Coast into the highest levels of government to startups, big banks, as well as a bit of other time in some other industries as well. Leverage has always been very much focused around supply chain management, thinking about how in which we can tackle from a perspective of performance management and optimizing those workflows. To answer your question, Olivia, around what we thought about as the crisis happened, the COVID pandemic happened, and to the note around Project N95 being very acutely related to the response, it all started with a very simple question of how we could help. And as that evolved into understanding what that landscape looked like, and specifically thereafter coming into like what we'd call jumping into the fire and being those fire jumpers and going after the hard problems, that has really impacted how we think about how we operate, what has shifted towards a marketplace structure and still part of our broader thesis of supply chain management.
Awesome. That's great, Andrew. Amanda, do you want to give us a quick introduction of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Greenberg, co-founder and CEO of Balloon. And Balloon is a platform that unlocks kind of that true value of collaboration by eliminating everything that gets in the way. So all the group dynamics, the biases, the fears. Our app reduces meeting time by 70%. Of course, even more important as we have more and more Zoom meetings and the number of meetings has increased. And 80% of what's shared on Balloon is brand new. So it hasn't been seen or heard within a company before. And I think during this whole shift, we really became more critical for our customers. So our customers became power users because they really wanted to know what questions they should ask their team. There's so much uncertainty. How do you kind of lead? How do you innovate in all these challenges and all this ever-changing landscape? And then also, how do you amplify unheard voices in the workplace? How do you identify actions that you want to take against systemic racism and police brutality, for example? So those are, some ways that we shifted and our product usage shifted and all of those different pieces. But I'm excited to dive in and excited for the conversation.
Incredible. Jeanne, do you want to go next?
Sure. Jeanne Jang. I lead the Ventures and Labs mission at E-Trade. And I have worked primarily in enterprises for most of my career, but have often partnered with organizations like Accelerprise as well as startups. This is my second time actually starting up a labs and ventures mission for a company. So the labs portion of what we do really is about trying out new technologies, trying to determine new business models, working with startups because we don't necessarily want to build everything in-house. And then we started a ventures fund where we are actually investing in early stage fintechs and enterprise techs. We went to the board early February, got the thumbs up to go forward with to invest. And in the spirit of disruption and how we've been adjusting, literally 4 weeks later, even before the pandemic was in full bloom, we got the announcement that we were being acquired by Morgan Stanley. And then a month later, we were in full pandemic mode. So it's been a very interesting start. And I think that for enterprises, and especially kind of the role that I have, which is to really ensure the success of startups, right? So I measure my success in being able to, identify interesting companies, opportunities, and have that be adopted by the enterprise. And I think in this time of uncertainty, I'd like to say that we're like doing super cool, magical, fast stuff. But the reality is I think that we have sort of shifted to kind of build out the pipeline of the kinds of companies that we want to eventually either invest in or bring in for prototypes. And so really sort of, I will say, building the pipeline and, if you will, sort of priming the pump with the enterprise so that when the time is more opportune, then we're ready to act.
Awesome. And Bocar, last but not least.
Hey guys, Bocar here, CEO and co-founder at A-Player. My background is that I was the first salesperson hired at a company called Hootsuite. I stayed at the company for about 8 years in multiple go-to-market roles, most notably leading the North America East region for the company, an office in Toronto, where I'm calling you guys from. At A-Player, we help drive performance at the AE level by providing personalized coaching and recommendation based on data. So how COVID and the current environment has really, for us, it's actually helped in a way because sales teams are now looking for new ways to manage their teams remotely. Field sales people have now moved from outside sales to inside sales for the most part. 90% of sales teams have moved to that environment. And all of the data and everything that we do as knowledge workers nowadays is zeros and ones. So all of that is data, and we're looking at new ways to leverage that to help people get better at selling.
Awesome. Incredible. So we have some great leaders on this panel today, and I know we have both startup founders, corporate innovators, investors on the call today. So I'd love to dig in a little bit deeper. If you think about right now, in virtual boardrooms across the country, we see leaders really facing unprecedented uncertainty. They're having tough and exciting conversations with their investors, with their employees, their customers around what the future holds. So Amanda, I'd love to start with you. You've been running Balloon now for the last 5 years, since 2015. Can you talk about what some of these conversations have looked like that you're having, these last couple of months?
Yeah, I think that this is such a massive reprogramming. It's just something that we've never gone through before, and of such a global, massive scale that I think that the conversations are just, they're so different. They're new. I think that one of the things that we're finding is just really effective as leaders is just being really transparent and as honest and open as possible, and really identifying just new modes of communication, from your team to you as a leader, from your customers to you, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's just investors, all those pieces, just really having open, transparent conversations and discussions, and also being really open with where there is an answer and where there isn't an answer. And, as you get new information, sharing that information out as a team and keeping everyone focused. But I also think there's just never been a time that I felt inside our company, and I'm sure others feel this way as well, just such a need and a passion to innovate and to move forward and to shift and be more strategic about all these different pieces. So yeah, that's what we've seen.
That's awesome. There is, despite the fact that there is a lot of uncertainty, this kind of camaraderie around the fact that we're thinking about what does it look like to go back and reimagine going back to work, or what are going to be our new strategic priorities, an opportunity to really be able to reevaluate, our people, our processes, how we're doing things. Jeanne, you mentioned this in your introduction, that you guys are thinking through how do we set ourselves up for success when kind of sunnier days come. So from the enterprise perspective, what are some of the conversations that you are having, knowing that you're kind of the change leader, you're rocking the boat a little bit? Have those conversations, accelerated, or what's been top of mind for you guys?
Yeah, so I think for us, the answer is really twofold. So I think when I think about my immediate team, the people in labs and ventures, I think similar to kind of what you were sharing, Amanda, you see all of the opportunities, right? Given how much the world has changed. And so we get really excited about it. So I think amongst us, we have lots of ideas, lots of things we want to do, propose lots of different things. However, I think realistically speaking, especially for E-Trade, because we are going through an acquisition as well as the reality of a pandemic, and it's the first time the company has actually, in any significant way, had the entire workforce work remote, right? So it's like change after change after change. So I think one of the things that we try to do is be mindful of the individuals that we're trying to introduce new things to, right? And recognize all of the changes that they're going through. And if their DNA is not as an entrepreneur or someone who's in corporate innovation, their ability to digest may not be exactly at the rate and pace in which I want to feed them. So I think when I bring in companies, I'm very sort of pointed in understanding my audience, seeing if that person and that organization really has sort of the wherewithal to, to kind of be open to something new. And if not, what we do is if we meet a great company, and I'll use Amanda again as an example, what we'll do is we'll sort of, have one meeting and we'll see how that goes. And to your point of transparency, I always say very much upfront, if you like the company, but the timing is not right, we can put a pin on it today and revisit, right? So I think making sure that the people on the enterprise side, the people that I have to work with, understand that there are options available to them, I think, gives them a sense of kind of relief and comfort.
That's a really great point of being able to meet people where they are. Some of us are working from home for the first time. We're working with asynchronous or digital first teams in a way that we never have before. I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into that kind of on a psychographic level. So, Bocar and Andrew, you guys are creating these smaller, nimble teams. You're enabling, individuals to come work with you. Jeannie and Amanda doing it on a little bit larger scale. But I think for a lot of people, there's a lot of stress and uncertainty in this unknown. And in thinking through, this really reconciliation process, this idea of let's reimagine what it means for us to work in this new way, building trust, creating community, establishing this psychological safety, what has that looked like for you guys?
I'll maybe jump in.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, Andrew, I was just thinking about his milkshake and how he gave me a bit of a craving. Thanks for that, Andrew. It's interesting. I was just this morning reading a McKinsey article about how they've surveyed a wide range of organizations in the U.S. and 92% of them were talking about how they are going to have to change their business model in the next few months, right? When I listen to that, so think about that. That's if you think of the US, it's a $20 trillion economy. That means $18 trillion is currently in flux, right? When I listen to that and when I put, a startup hat on, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. If you can think of ways to help these companies adapt to this new reality, then you're positioning yourself right. As a larger organization, you're probably going to struggle to do that as fast as we, nimble company, as you just mentioned, would be able to do it. And there's also the reality of everybody working remote as well, right? So there's like a few different shifts that are happening at the same time from an economy standpoint, from a business model standpoint, and also from a remote standpoint. Half of CFOs are effectively saying that working remote is now going to be an option, right? So I think it's, talking about opportunities is even something that's a bit of an obvious thing. I think the hardest part is really honing in on the right thing to focus on with in the midst of uncertainty, right? And the one thing I'd say that we've learned is that, especially right now, people are really thinking about one or two top priorities and nothing more, right? So really thinking about selling to companies as though, regardless of who you're selling to, you're effectively pitching to a CFO. So that's my one kind of insight here. Lots of opportunities. There's really only one or two things that any company is really focused on at the moment.
I think that's a great point. And Amanda, I'm curious, obviously at Balloon, you guys are thinking a lot about creating spaces and places for people to freely and openly share their opinions. And I think talked to, countless companies over the last couple of months who have expressed, frustration with being able to establish that same level of trust with their coworkers or with, partners, given that we're not all getting together in a room and meeting together. How have you guys been thinking about shifting to this remote first mindset of being able to still establish that trust and that community and build those relationships effectively?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge, right? It's just like the amount of like disengagement of people feeling all kinds of stressors is just a different level. And the need for psychological safety amongst teams is huge. And, are you asking kind of the right questions? Are people able to share together and still kind of see alignment or agreement as a team is something that we're hearing and seeing a lot. And people like to be productive. Like it's in our nature to be productive. And so when people feel like those, one or two priorities aren't clear and there's uncertainty around which direction the company's moving, there's just a lot of panic. And so I think one of the things that we're seeing is, even in like the postponement of, sports teams, and we have sports teams is a set of our customers, this need to be innovative together as teams. And so I think we're seeing that shift. We create psychological safety because we're productive together and we're moving in a direction together. So yeah, that's something we're seeing. I was surprised at, I think that typically it's like, are we experiencing the same thing? Are we sharing this sentiment? But really it's like about how do we produce and innovate together?
That's a great perspective. And I love this idea of, what is the direction that the company is moving, which is a nice transition because Andrew, I'd love to dig in a little bit. You know, Bocar mentioned there's a lot of opportunities, especially for startup founders that are kind of coming on the tailwinds of this pandemic and crisis shift in consumer behaviors and needs. But you kind of had a pretty, radical shift in terms of pivoting the business or repositioning. Can you tell us a little bit about, the path to starting at 95 and how you pivoted leverage?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned before, the primary thesis around N95 really was the question around how we could help. I'm sure everyone, especially for those who have been in different walks of life, were asked around what they could do when it comes to how they help with the COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis that pursued. I think what's fascinating to me is that, Bocar, you're kind of talking about this nature of people trying to reconcile around what's new versus what's the old pieces. And Amanda, you were mentioning this as well and thinking through the changes. What I found most interesting as the team continues to grow, and I'll talk a bit about that as well, is that there was definitely a sense of disenfranchisement that happened across around basically the normalities that were removed out of it. And there's an interesting framing around psychology, around cognitive closure, around people needing to reconcile aspects when major disasters happen, finding a way to do that. When N95 was formed, it was really around that question. And then subsequently what happened is that we just kept running towards the hard problem. And I know that might sound like a bit pejorative, but we kept looking at what is the friction of things that are happening to connect frontline workers and healthcare organizations who need access to PPE and other critical supplies, and the mismatch and the frictions around that on the supply side, and thinking about where we could really elevate that and what were the really hard challenges. And there are many things to go tackle, but really those there and what you're most suited for. I think that really gets to some of the things that Bocar was talking about too. When he was talking about the opportunity and those things that exist and the things that are out there to go after. For us at Leverage and subsequently Project N95 and the amazing group of individuals and volunteers who focus on in that charitable mission, they're thinking through how do we go continue removing that friction and also identifying ability to support as much audience as possible. But at the end of the day, I think as an anecdote to this, is that what I found most fascinating is that this entire exercise within, at least in the world that I live in, it's just a giant redefinition of understanding and building trust. And this new trust model that exists around this idea of, how does an individual doctor to a small practice, to an outpatient clinic, to a hospital, to a government, to a country, to FEMA, the spectrum, how do they trust a new set of entrants into suppliers? That's where marketplace gets formed, about building that trust and serving that way. The same thing goes in the communities of the team members who've come together to help work that together. And I think we're all figuring that out in a different format as well.
Oh, Jeannie, I think you're muted. There you
go. No, I was asking if I think what you said really resonated, and if you found the answer yet to the question of trust.
I definitely don't. I will say, to Amanda's point, which I think is really fascinating, is around the transparency model. As we define the values on the Project 95 side, which is, as you can imagine, a very much alignment for how I think about the world, it was, this people first model, this bias towards action, and this transparency that is needed. And so Leverage has always been around this driving towards transparency on supply chain and performance and creating that piece. Project 95 and the marketplace and all that collectively is around transparency. Just as a very specific example, because I know granularity is always helpful, is when I get on a phone call or when someone else gets on a phone call to talk to a frontline healthcare provider, the question they ask us is, when we ask where should you set the RFQ and the request for quote and go there, they're like, well, what should we pay? And that's a mind-boggling structure, because that tells us that, one, they don't know, and they also are thinking about, are they trusting us to know that piece of it? And so, Jeannie, I don't actually have an answer for you, and I definitely haven't solved it, but I do think around the value structure of that transparency and building a model that works towards that is really key.
Thanks.
That's awesome. And digging into that trust piece, Andrew, you're talking about new opportunities. Bocar, you're talking about this as well. In this environment, from a startup perspective, a lot of you guys are selling into enterprise organizations. Jeannie saying, she's managing expectations on the enterprise side. In this environment, how do you think that startups can think about their sales cycles and the realities of navigating some of these sales? Bocar, I feel like you'd be a great person to kick this one off.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just checking if I was muted. Yeah, that's a good question. It's, I think, there could be a lot of different answers here. I always start by thinking about, being a good salesperson is really helping somebody solve their own challenges and their own needs, right? So I think the right way to think about this is to not so much think too much about how sales changes for you as an organization, but more what the needs and priorities of your customers are going to be and how that's shifting and their buyer behaviors are shifting. For the simple fact that I think if you kind of take that mindset and put that hat on, then your new go-to-market becomes a little bit more obvious than it was before. As a very quick example, I've been working with this one organization that used to have a sales motion that was focused on landing a deal into large organizations and then expanding. And amid COVID, they realized that it takes them just as long to sell that smaller deal than to sell an actual deal, right? So what does that mean? That means that their entire sales motion changes, and the type of customer that they're focusing on as well changes, and their priorities have changed, right? So all to say, I think my one piece of advice here would be to think about your customers, how this is impacting their own buying behaviors and reality, and how your solution aligns to help them or not. And then that determines a little bit what your new go-to-market motion should look like, and what your customer acquisition strategy should look like, and your sales motion should look like.
I think that's great, shifting to being more customer centric in your mindset around sales versus, focusing just on your product or your new positioning is really important. Andrew, I saw you were unmuting. Did you have something to add there?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to echo, I 100% agree with Bocar. I think the thing that even when we talk to individuals and organizations and procurement individuals as well, it's I learned a lot from Accelerprise as well in a past capacity around thinking this, but just asking the right questions of what are the pain points, whether it's the magic wand question of those pieces, and really structuring a way of back to it structured through how can you help, what are you going to do to help them, to the subject line, to the email that you send, to the way you end the email, to the conversation and the tone, the intonation of your voice, because you're not meeting in person, is so critical that when you're on a phone with someone who's trembling around, whether in our case whether they're going to get the supplies they need to protect their staff, or they're thinking through, can I trust this new source? It really is that approach that Bocar was talking about.
That's great. So we have time here for 2 more questions before we are going to kick it over to our main stage event. So a handful of you have led, during periods of uncertainty in the past. Some of you maybe are facing this for the first time, but you're all leading groups of people within your respective organizations. I'm curious to know, what has been the most challenging part and what has been the most rewarding in this time? Jeannie, do you want to kick us off?
The most challenging is sort of what I described in terms of just the multitude of changes that my colleagues have had to face on the enterprise side. And therefore, having lots of great ideas, meaning lots of great startups, and not being able to move forward at the rate and pace. I think on the rewarding side, in the whole spirit of building trust with your own teams, with your colleagues, I think we've had to be much more mindful about almost over communicating and being that much more deliberate about being transparent as to how you make decisions, right? And so I have team members who are remote, and now that we're all remote, it has actually made it's leveled the playing field in terms of there's no sort of centralized, this is where headquarters is, and so if you're in the office, then
Right.
you're at an advantage. I think that aspect of really getting to know almost everyone, I think much better has definitely been rewarding.
Awesome. Amanda?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of kind of the most challenging part, because it's just all been, I think, so new. But I think one of the most challenging parts, I think overall right now, is because we're all remote, there's so much uncertainty, is just this heightened need for vulnerability as a leader, I think, across the team, and the need for just stronger communication in ways that I just never envisioned in the past. I think it's just so important. On a personal note, most challenging part is that I had our second baby, right at the beginning of COVID, so April 2nd. So leading the team through all of this while also, welcoming new life was, I think, challenging and unexpected, but also a bonding experience for us as a team, who really, just supported us through all of that. And then I think the most rewarding part is exactly that. Like, I think that, there's such a reprogramming going on, and there's so much opportunity, and there's so much newness. And I think that as founders and, in a startup, I think you're used to having things not necessarily go right. You're used to kind of all this uncertainty. And, I think everyone's now being forced to get there with uncertainty and see opportunity in a different way. And so I think that that's been a rewarding change. And I think it's going to really result in a different world, and I hope a better world in some ways.
Oh, that's awesome. And congrats on baby number 2. That's, honestly incredible. Superpowers is what required to raise a child and run a company.
Yeah.
Andrew or Bocar, do you guys have anything else that hasn't been mentioned?
Yeah.
God.
Great. I was trying to offer Bocar my milkshake, but it's fine. Amanda, congratulations, by the way. Children are like this final frontier, and I find it wildly amazing. The only thing I would add to that is I think from our foxhole, what we've seen, prioritization model is always a hard one for us, primarily because we were born out of a rapid response world global pandemic that may have only happened maybe 300 years ago as the only comparative. And so in that model, it's everything but was even more so on fire. And then how do you start reeling back to that and almost thinking through how you prioritize time that is very translatable to a startup ecosystem. And the one thing I did think about when you asked about the most, the thing that I maybe enjoy the most about this is, or surprised me, this sounds really maybe pejorative or funny there, but seriously, the humanity and people that have shown up and how they've operated and chosen. To give you a very discrete example again is, these healthcare workers or frontline, they could try to go buy a whole bunch because they've been qualified and have access. They literally, a lot of the conversation is how much do I need, or how much should I be buying in respect for my others who are on the front line. And so there's some sense of that. And that's just one discrete example around how the people come together and make these choices towards humanity of supporting each other, which I think is a very amazing function.
Oh, that's great. And Bocar?
I think you guys are ending on some really great points, so I don't feel like I've got much to add.
Well, that's all we have time for, guys, tonight with our mini panel. Thank you guys all for your insight and perspective here. If you're in the audience and interested in continuing the conversation with any of these leaders, don't hesitate to reach out. It is now time for the main stage portion of our event tonight, featuring Rowan and Tien. If you have any questions for Rowan and Tien, please drop them in the Q&A. We'll have a portion for audience question at the end. I will save Rowan the pleasure of introducing Tien and Zuora, but I get the honor of introducing Rowan. So Rowan Trollope is the CEO of Five9 and an Accelerprise advisor. For those of you who don't know, Five9 is a leading provider of cloud contact center software for the enterprise. Rowan is a recognized Silicon Valley leader and has really a breadth of experience in software solutions and cloud innovations at organizations like Cisco, Symantec, and more. So without further ado, I will hand it on over to Rowan.
Thank you, Olivia, and what a great panel. Thanks to the panel and Amanda and Bocar, Jeanne, Andrew. What a great time listening to you all. I think I have Tien on right now. I don't know if Tien can turn his video on and unmute. Let's make sure he's there. There he is. Hey, Tien, how are you?
There it goes.
All right. So I'd like to let me introduce Tien to the audience here. Tien is the founder and CEO of Zuora. We're going to find all about Zuora in a moment, but he was employee number 11 at Salesforce before he founded Zuora in 2008 during the financial crisis in 2008. Sorry, got somebody trying to call me here. And is a recognized leader and also an author of a book called Subscribed, which really created this concept in Silicon Valley and frankly all over the world of the subscription economy. Tien is an investor. He's also part of the Accelerprise community and supports the Accelerprise companies. So thanks for doing that. All around great guy, an incredible visionary, leader, CEO, a husband and father. So Tien, welcome to the Innovator Series. Thank you for doing this today.
Thanks, Rowan. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the warm welcome, warm intro. It's always great to talk.
Awesome. Well, you know, I've got tons of questions here, and I think we have 40 minutes. So we're going to try and make sure that we leave time for audience questions. I'm going to actually start my timer here so that we don't go over. We could probably do a whole nother session if we wanted to, but let's shoot for about 40 minutes here. So I'm going to go ahead and start that. All right. So let's start out with Zuora. Tell us about Zuora, just to give us a very high level. What does Zuora do? How big are you? You know, how many employees do you have? Give us the lay of the land of Zuora quickly.
Yeah, well, like the company's name is Accelerprise Portfolio. We're a software as a service company, and so we service B2B companies with a software platform. Our software platform functionally covers pricing, quoting, ordering, billing, revenue recognition, the whole, you know, back office or quote to revenue cycle, if you will, but with a specific focus on subscription businesses. And so our vision is really to power the best companies in the world that run on a subscription business model. So it could be companies like Zoom. It could be HBO, the Wall Street Journal. It could be GM OnStar. Really, all sorts of subscription services is what we power today.
Five9. We're a happy Zuora customer.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tien. Now, I've got a question that I want to ask you, and I've been meaning to ask this for a while. We'll talk more about the company in a second. But what does Zuora mean? Where did the name come from?
Yeah. So it was there's three of us co-founders. And me and two co-founders who've since retired. They were from WebEx, and so, you know, the genesis of the company was I did spend the first 9 years of Salesforce in that company, and if you simplify down, you know, oversimplify, Salesforce is really about trying to figure out how to make the subscription business model work for software. And WebEx was the same, and these were two of the first software as a service companies that went public, and so. Fast forward to 2007, 2008, and you know, we all both realized there was so much work that we had to do in the back office in order to make this thing work. And our question was, okay, we can see that software was going to move under subscriptions, but could this happen with other industries? And so we envisioned a world where anything could be really offered as a service: transportation, food, entertainment, whatever it is. And so the three co-founders got together and started this. We actually took our last names. Right, kind of like Scrabble tiles, put it into a bag, shook it up, and just kept on drawing. You know, we wanted 5 letters. We didn't want a URL more than 5 letters, and we thought it would be temporary. But then we never got around to changing it, and we finally did. The customers all got used to it, and so inertia kind of kicked in, and that became our name.
And now you're known worldwide as the leaders of creating this concept of the subscription economy, which of course has changed so many things. I did read in your book, Subscribed, by the way, for our audience. the book Subscribed. You can get it on Amazon. Great book, a really, really terrific read. Lots of case studies and lots of stories, and very visionary, frankly. When was Subscribed written, Tien?
It got published 2 years ago, so June 2018.
And was it this is the first book you've written?
The first and only.
And when was it hard? I've always wondered.
I mean, I did have a co-author.
Okay.
But I would say, like many things, this is sort of years in the making. And when you look at marketing or product marketing, we've always thought the best way to tell your stories is through the stories of your customers.
Yeah.
And so, we wanted to tell a broader story of the subscription economy, but through the stories of our customers. And so we've always thought if we could just write a book and think of it as a product marketing book of case studies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The way, traditional product marketing writes these case studies is very dry, right? Problem, solution, whatever. We wanted to bring the stories to life. And I remember we were powering a pet tracking device. Qualcomm had a division and sounds kind of simple today, but this is the dawn of 3G and the idea that you could actually put a 3G device on your dog and kind of see where your dog's been during the whole day was crazy. And so we said, this is a good story. This is a story how like you can actually bring subscriptions to the pet industry. And I remember telling this to a business week. I was trying to pitch Zuora to Business Week. And then 3 weeks later, I see this article. And I told the story of this pet tracking device. And I see this article, it was all about the pet tracking device and didn't mention us at all. I was like, maybe the stories of our customers are actually better than the stories of us. So we started just writing. We said, like, how do we write a journalistic style articles on our customers, really communicate the story? I wound up hiring Gabe to help me do this. And so we've been writing for 4 to 5 years. And I think it was probably the summer of 2017 where I said, like we just had our user conference, which we call Subscribed. And we said, it's time to take this collection of stories that we've been doing over the last few years and turn it into a book. And so it became probably the first 10, 20% of the material for the book.
That's great.
And it took a few iterations to get the right structure right. And so we said, hey, don't come to the office, just spend 6 months and let's do this book together.
Well, it is a good book to read. And one of the stories you tell in there, Tien, is actually the founding story of Zuora. And you talk about a meeting you were in with Mark Benioff, or perhaps Mark was in a meeting with some of the WebEx guys.
Yeah.
And he called you into the meeting, and I guess somebody said, or I think you guys were trying to fix your billing problem and your subscription platform, and they said, well, it's a pain in the ass for us too. Somebody should go start a company to do that. It was an interesting story. Was Mark supportive of you leaving at the time? How did that go down?
I'm of the philosophy that when you leave a company, you got to leave it really well, especially a company that you've been so involved with. And so, there was a true story. It was that meeting, and it was a meeting about some idea that Min, one of the co-founders of WebEx, was cooking up. And but we wound up spending like 45 minutes of the hour talking about just kvetching about our billing systems. And so KV, left that meeting, says, there might be something here. I kind of worked with him on the side, and things started the momentum started kicking in. And I said, okay, time out, guys. I really need to go and talk to Benioff, right? And so I remember having lunch with him, and we were talking about, well, what am I going to do in 2008, right? And because there's a bunch of things I was just wrapping up in 2007, and I just kind of slipped in this idea. And I was ready to say, well, look, if Mark still needs me at Salesforce, then I might need to wait another year. But he was really supportive. He was really supportive and said, no, this sounds like a great idea. I think you're ready to do your own thing. And then he wanted to invest, which was even better. And so,
there you go.
Yeah.
Great investor to have, and a great mentor and friend to many of us. So you did start. I'm going to sort of now turn a little bit to just some talk about leadership. You mentioned 2008, of course. 2008, probably most people remember that. Nothing about Zuora, but probably most people think about 2008. They think global financial crisis. Where were you in the founding process when that crisis happened? Was it post-crisis? Were you actually already established and off to the races? Tell me about the timing.
Well, we had actually closed our Series A already early that year.
Okay.
And so we were pre-revenue, we were pre-customers, but we were about to launch probably call it our beta, right? Our first release, and we had customers lined up but no revenue. And I'll tell you, it talks about the impact sometimes you can have when you pick the right venture partners. And I remember about 4 or 5 months in, we were generating leads for our beta customers, and we were getting good flow. And so Peter Fenton, who's our investor from Benchmark and the series investor, said, why don't you come and give an update to the partnership? And so this would have been probably July, right? And Lehman Brothers fell in September. So it was getting a little shaky, but it wasn't that bad yet. And I remember Bill Gurley popped in the middle of the meeting and says, well, if you guys are seeing this type of demand, you should go raise a round right now. I was like, Bill, we still have like 90% of the money from the Series A in the bank. And he's like, no, this is why you raise money. And I don't know what's going to happen in Q4. Oh. So we went and did a fundraising process in the depths of summer where like the VCs, they're all like on their safaris or their so we couldn't find anybody, right? But we found a bunch of folks, and Shasta ultimately stepped up and said, yeah, we'll do your Series B. Okay. And then as soon as we signed the term sheet, like literally the next week, Lehman Brothers falls. Oh boy. Where we're not going to get the cash. Luckily, the Shasta guys, then their LPs. Yeah. We banked the money, and we decided just to leave the money there. Now we had no revenue, so of course we still had burn for a while, but we managed really, really lean.
Well, I want to talk about crisis, but Bill Gurley, I think they should call him the Oracle of Silicon Valley. He's I play poker with Bill sometimes, and he's an amazing poker player. So that was good advice from Bill, I think. Yeah. You might not have a company if it wasn't for that raise at this point. Well, so you were leading the company through the financial crisis, and here we are finding ourselves in another crisis. I wanted to talk about leadership lessons as an entrepreneur and now as a CEO of a public company, leading through multiple crises. And of course, you and I go way back, to 2000 and, the original .com crisis. And, there's been many crises I think we've all led through, but what are some of the top lessons that you would love that you would share about leading through crisis?
And I know you're going through the same thing. We've certainly talked about and compared notes. In a time of uncertainty, I would say that people need to feel a sense of, people need to be moored, right? So there has to have some level of stability. And so, crisis management, number one, when you're dealing with like, PR crises or things like that, is to really find the floor, right? And the point of that is to find a point of stability that you can depend upon, and then you can really, really start planning. And so, I'm sure you went through the same thing, which is, well, how do we find the right floor? How do we make sure we don't run out of cash? And how do we create some stability? Now, we're fortunate enough to have a subscription-based business model. Right, and that's been just a gigantic blessing. Now, not all our employees realize that. So the first thing was to do an all hands to say, look, let's take you through the numbers. And we've been doing, analyzing our customer base and so on and so forth. That says there's not really a disaster scenario for us. So you might hear about other companies with 30, 50, 80% drops in revenue. That's not really going to happen to us. Right. That being said, we're going to be really, really smart about how we manage expenses. And just because we're in a time of uncertainty, and that gives us the most number of options, communicating that, we're in a fortunate situation for the company to be a point of stability for this crisis, because this crisis, there's personal stuff going on, there's kids not going to school, right? There's parents. And so priority number one is to give everyone a sense of what's going on, right? Be transparent, establish that stability. And then, the big picture is eventually these things will pass. The .com crisis passed. Going before that, probably 1981 recession passed, right? And there will be a chance to have an upswing. And so how do we make sure we're prepared for that?
I think that line, "This too shall pass," is something that probably more than one CEO uttered at the beginning of this crisis, although it was hard to say with a straight face because nobody knew, but the full extent. How are you keeping your teams engaged? So I think giving them a point of stability, I think that's great advice. Find the floor. What about engagement? So we're now sort of rolling into a second wave of kind of like false starts, let's call it, on reopening. I'm hearing from my employees and friends and so on, there's a fatigue setting in. I think early on in this crisis, there was a let's join arms and we can get through this. And there was a sort of flatten the curve was the buzz at the time. Let's get through it. Now we're sort of into this fuzzy middle period where it's not clear when anything is going to end. How are you keeping your teams engaged through this?
I would say the first thing is, I think it was Admiral Shotwell, Prisoners of War story, right? That he said, in hindsight, the folks that are expected to be saved any month, they didn't really make it. And the folks that said, look, this is just a new norm, settle in for the long run.
Yeah, the pessimists survived.
So we definitely said that. So even back in end of March, early April, we said, look, and I'm spending all my free time, right, reading about this and this, what is the CDC saying, and then watching what was going on in some of the countries that got hit first, and just like this could be a year and a half, and so whatever it is, like go take care of your work environment, right? And if you need to go buy some monitors and buy some chairs and whatever it is, right, do what you need to do. And the company will take care of that stuff, because you just got to settle in for long. And if we're pleasantly surprised we're back in the office in 60 days, then great.
Very nice.
It was just a learning experience. And so I think we all kind of settled in and figure stuff out and really try to make it work. And including, the folks that you sort of worry about, the folks, dual working parents with young kids, right, with no support. Yeah. And you're worried about the single folks stuck at home, right? Really not being able to see anybody. And so you find ways of really taking care of those groups and carrying everybody along with you.
And how's your lockdown been? So where are you today? Are you in San Francisco?
I'm in San Francisco. Yeah.
Okay, so you have, I think every time I talk to you, sometimes you're in New York, sometimes you're in Hong Kong, but you're in San Francisco.
I've been stuck in San Francisco now for, we haven't had a haircut. I think so.
I can tell you have the COVID hair like I do. And is your family with you?
They are. They were not for a while. They were actually in a different country.
So that must have been tough.
It took a little while to get them back. And for a while, it was a little dicey with all the lockdowns on air transport.
And are your kids school age, or are they going to be going back to school? Or I guess we don't know if schools are going to open at this point in San Francisco, but where are they in school, and what's the sort of story with that?
We're waiting to see. But on the summer, they're just Zoom summer camp.
Zoom summer camp.
Yeah. So it's I'm on my staff calls, and in the background, my daughter's singing.
And do you have your kids been coming into your meetings sometimes?
She's 11, and so the last thing she wants is to be caught in.
I get the kids come up and they know where the camera line is. They'll hand me the iPad and say, "Unlock the iPad, Dad." So
yeah, exactly.
I see that. What's it like for you? You've led. I guess you guys went public in 2018. Was it March? 2018. 18.
Yeah. Gosh, March. Yeah.
So 10 years private, 2 years public. Talk about the dynamics of leading as a CEO, a private company, and then as a public company. How's that been for you?
It's definitely different. It's easier to tell a long-term story when you're private, right? Mm-hmm. The next financing round is down the line, and these are the things that you can see. If we do these things, the next financing round is going to be great, right? And you still tell those stories. But unfortunately, there's a scorecard in front of everybody's face on a day-to-day basis. And so you have to really reinforce that long-term story and over again. And
with your investors?
To investors, but also to employees.
Yeah.
To employees, to investors, to employees' families, right? To press. And so really re-emphasizing stronger communications. And then there's also a company size aspect to it as well, right? And so we're 1,200 employees. You guys are even larger, and it's not like it's a small group of people that you could just all get together in the kitchen, or just on one Zoom call, right? And so the communication techniques are going to be very, very different. And then you really have to start thinking long term. And so we had to really get a muscle to say, okay, look, everything we do, how do we think about it as a year from now? Right, because you know this, right? A private company, you can almost plan quarter to quarter. You plan sort of the big arc. Yeah. You can manage the quarter to quarter. And in a public company, you really have to learn how to say, well, this is where we're going to be 4 quarters from now, and here's the 3 milestones every single quarter of how we're going to get there. And then and hopefully knock those milestones down, and really articulate things from a more short-term and long-term perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a good summary. What surprised you the most, I guess, positively and negatively in becoming a public company CEO and running the company as a public? What was the biggest surprise that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, so I think in hindsight, and this is all out there in the public, right? So you run these companies and you go through cycles of the company, right? And it's one thing to manage through the cycle. And what does that mean, right? So if you look at what we've done, we've hired, I've got a chief revenue officer that started, so he's 3 quarters in. We've got a CFO that literally is 6 weeks in. So I had to hire.
Congratulations.
We grabbed lunch the other day, outdoors, and all that. And he's like, "This is only the second time I've actually seen you." He's like, "Yeah, this is the second time we've actually met face to face." That's the CFO. I've got a head of products that's about 10 months or 11 months. I've got a head of HR that's starting soon.
Oh, wow.
And so having to rebuild the company in terms of the management team and all that kind of stuff it's a piece of cake as a private company.
Yeah.
As a public company.
Much harder. And you kind of, I certainly, this is actually, funnily enough, that's one of my biggest surprises is you've got these big investors, you've got the investors that have a big chunk of your company and they pay so much, but they have there's a veil, you only show them what you show them. So they pick up on every little thing. And especially on the sell side, there's a tendency to want to, look, if they've got a thesis about your company, they can take any of those facts, the fact that you're rebuilding your management team and spin that in a negative way. And all of a sudden you're dealing with a PR crisis and your stock's crashing and it's like, what the hell's going on here? So it's that none of that stuff really has to do with building your business. So I think it can be very distracting. And I've certainly, I think
as a private company can say, well, let me just be transparent. Let me show you everything. But public investors, I mean, one is it wouldn't be a fair process, right, for everyone. That's the big thing. But
yeah,
they don't have the time. And they're not deep investors that are only on, say, 12 boards and going deep, right? These guys are spreading themselves across.
It's remarkable. To kind of bring it back to subscriptions, a couple months ago, I saw you on Kramer and you said that people were starting to wake up to the power of recurring revenue. And that I think you said 4 out of 5 companies sustained or grew their subscriber base in March through May. So the segue here is running a public company that sells subscriptions like you do, like I do, is way easier than starting every quarter from scratch and having to make the quarter and the whole deal. When you said that 4 out of 5 companies who sell subscriptions, I hope everyone listening is operating a subscription business or thinking about how to make it into a subscription business. But of the 4 out of 5, is that because most of them are software? Are most of your customers software companies, or how do they break down across industries?
So we've been branching. The subscription economy is hitting non-software as we had hoped or predicted, and so only about half of our revenues are coming from what we call high tech, and so that's software and hardware, because the hardware companies are all fast becoming software or cloud companies.
Okay.
And so media, newspapers, video streaming, music streaming, publishing, right, which is the B2B version of media, but it's all digital information. But manufacturing has been one of the more fascinating things. And
how do you have a subscription business in manufacturing?
Well, so it's 1989. I'm with like Parker and Frank and Dave and the guys at Salesforce. We push out our first release. Mm-hmm. And so it's stuff we take for granted now, but we're a bunch of software guys that used to ship software on a CD, and you don't know what the customer's actually doing with your stuff until they call in support, right? But we push it out on the internet, and then we're watching, right? Like there's no security back there, right? We're like in the database, and what are these people doing? And like, how come they're not logging in? And how come they're creating contacts? And we're actually watching the stuff, and it's fascinating to us, right? And I remember like 2-3 weeks in, we're like, why is this customer doing this? And we call the customer up and we said, this is like kind of like reverse support, right? And so up till then, software companies just had no idea how their customers are using their product. And this has changed software as a service, right? This is like agile and all that kind of stuff, right? You just release the product, see what they're doing. And you can see this whole way of working is built around the software industry. But every manufacturer of a physical product is going through that same thing because their cars, their appliances, they're all collecting all this data and just dumping it in some cloud service, right? And so you can imagine like a Ford engineer is saying, no, that's how my customers actually drive. And this is how many miles they use, and they do the same patterns every single day, and down to the specific customer, right? Not just as a general pattern. This is how they're, and so like the software companies realize our customers actually don't know how to use our product in a better way than we can. So like we got to do a better job designing it. And so you're seeing the same thing. Like, I want to take over, the amount of detergent that's being used in that washing machine because like they're doing it all wrong.
Right.
And so the same revolution that we see happening in software is going to happen, or the digital world, right, with news and all that. It's going to happen in the physical world. Every single physical product is going to go through that same exact revolution. So manufacturing companies, whether it's tractors or cars or wearables or appliances, today is actually our fastest growing.
Yeah, I think that's terrific, 50%. And I assume, is that faster growing than your software business?
It is, because software business is shrinking as a percent.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like Elon talks about cars as turning his Teslas into a service, put it back into the fleet. You said, I don't want to own the car. I want to get somewhere.
That's right.
That's a great, that whole concept of usership versus ownership that I think so many, and it's frankly, I think it's somewhat generational too, that people sort of understand that more inherently, millennials and Gen Z, the lack of ownership and so on. I guess the big mistake that I see businesses make, and having been in an early subscription business in the mid 2000s, I worked at Norton Antivirus, and we built, a huge $2 billion recurring revenue subscription business before SaaS was a thing. Yeah. But the mistake we made is we figured out subscriptions, but we never figured out the more important and positive side of the ship, which is directly connecting with your customer and understand what they're doing and how they're doing it. I think if there's one sort of message that I think is important, and it's in your book, frankly, is to get out to people, is for incumbent businesses or legacy businesses that are transitioning, they kind of get the stars in their eyes of subscription and recurring revenue and why that's good from a financial perspective, but don't understand why it's so important that you're delivering an outcome, not a product. It's a complete redesign of a business, which is why I think so many of these incumbents are struggling and failing. Because they don't understand that you essentially have to remake your business from the ground up. It's not just a new billing system. It's not as easy as signing up for Zuora and all of your problems are fixed. Many of them are on the financial billing side, but not the structure of your company and also the structure of your channel, right? Like if you've got a channel in between, you think about Ford, that's great that they can connect to their customers, but those dealers sit right in line there. And if those dealers don't allow it, it's going to be a tough move. Whereas Elon and Tesla and some of the new car companies are like, no, we're direct to consumer. We know exactly what our cars are doing. So I think that's interesting. Let's talk about opportunities for entrepreneurs. We have a lot of startup founders on the line. I'm going to pivot now and talk about opportunities and new businesses. So you're a visionary. What are the opportunities out there today for new entrepreneurs? What startup do you wish existed that doesn't exist today? Maybe is a different way of asking the question.
Yeah, if be a VC, if I was about that, like just talking to the Accelerprise crew, cohort after cohort after cohort, rather than give a specific idea, right? There's so many ideas, and typically what I look for is really two things. It's what was the problem before, and what changed usually in technology or behavior, right, as a secondary effect of technology that rewrites the rules that eliminates that problem, right? And what was the big change? And the internet is the obvious one, right? Pre-internet, post-internet, obviously two completely different worlds. IoT, right? And you were part of a big IoT initiative at Cisco, right? But pre-IoT, it just changes how you think about manufacturing, how you build products, and so on and so forth, right? And so now you can have a digital relationship with your customers that just completely changes everything. Why ship products anymore? And so just being able to answer that, and things are changing, all the time. around us. And so how did the iPhone change? How does this iPhone change everything? Right? How does, say AI change everything? How does like everybody getting used to, so like this moment in time, there's going to be an explosion of ideas, because now that everyone is used to being at home, what does it mean? Right? And I'm sort of watching, as an example, how my daughter, right, just as a representative kid, is learning and what she can do at home. What you lose and what you gain, and just really understanding all that is pretty amazing. Just another simple example. I don't know that companies are going to have user conferences. I'm sure there's some pendulum swing back, but it is not going back to the way it was before. So now you say, well, there's a whole opportunity set that opened up, because they used to get all these benefits from the user conferences.
Yeah.
Now they don't want to do it anymore. There's better ways, but there's probably 100 startups in there, that you can form. And so there's plenty of ideas, but start with like, what changed, right? What changed in the world, and how does that fundamentally rewrite the rules? And what is the opening that came up?
Gosh, that's a great answer and very insightful. I think, as you said, like if you just think about COVID, you could look at how your life exists today on Zoom. And obviously we're using Zoom now. I love Zoom and everything that Eric has done there, but there's 100 startups waiting to be built on Zoom. My wife sees her personal trainer on Zoom. I see my doctor on Zoom. Like, turns out, in my opinion, the standard Zoom interface is not perfect for doctor meetings.
That's right.
And it's not the same interface you would have for a physical trainer or for a yoga class or whatever. So I think there's hundreds of new companies that are waiting to be started, and we're looking for the best of them, obviously, at Acceleprise, and we've got some incredible companies there. I think we're going to move now on to rapid fire questions. Okay. The first one: what is something that you are right about, team, that is controversial or not widely accepted?
That I'm right about?
Yeah.
So instead of one thing, I found that I have this habit that I don't know that I'm not unique in this, but it's rare. I tend to want to look at everything backwards.
Okay.
And so if somebody tells me there's a cause and this is the effect, I want to see, well, what if the effect actually is the cause? And I think we're wired to think of things in a single direction. And oftentimes, if you just kind of reverse the problem, right, you're trying to achieve an effect, you think this is the cause, so you go after the cause to get the effect. Well, what if you just kind of go after the effect, and then you see all of a sudden the cause just kind of happens? So, and so I find that people have hidden assumptions of cause and effect, and if you just reverse it, if you build a great product, the customers will buy it. Well, what if they get the customers to buy it and then you go build a product?
That's good.
And look, the reality is somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Just challenging thinking and kind of reversing.
That's great.
Thinking is I think just a way to sort of see the world in a different light and get a much fuller perspective.
I like that. That's terrific. Okay. What book do you recommend to startup founders?
To startup founders.
Yeah.
So I think that I think that most startup founders, not all, is they're driven by the idea, and they tend to forget the human element, right? And, it just seems to be a pattern. And so you eventually reach a point where, like, gosh, you got to learn how to get people working well together, right? It's not just about the idea of what's being right.
Yeah.
And so so I like the books that are about organizational structures, design, and teaming, right? And a big part of I think a founder's journey is how to actually distance yourself from the problem and empower, enable others to do it. And that's probably one of the hardest things that I've seen, including myself, right, for founders to learn how to do.
Yeah, there's lots of great books in that field. So really about managing people, managing teams, organizational
Yeah.
dynamics.
The
Yeah.
simplest one was Five Dysfunctions of the Team. It's such an easy read.
Oh, just a great book.
Lessons, right? You know, once a year or two, just dust it off and read it again.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Highly recommended. I love that book. And, you know, it's funny, back to our starting, you know, talk about being CEOs of public companies. I mean, that is almost all that I do, is getting teams to work together and create a positive team
At some
dynamic.
level, that's all you can do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And General Stanley McChrystal has a wonderful analogy that he shares, which is he asks the question about, you know, if you think about a gardener, he asks the question, the gardener, his job is to grow plants, but his question is, who grows the plant? And most people would think the gardener grows the plant. Well, the answer he gives is no, the plant grows itself. The gardener does not actually do any of the growing. He tends the soil, he mends the soil, he creates the opportunities for growth, sunlight, et cetera, but the plants grow themselves. And it's a very good analogy to leadership, I think. And unfortunately, people, when they get into leadership positions, don't like to compare themselves to gardeners. You know, that's not a very sexy comparison. We'd sometimes rather think about ourselves like the platoon commander in Saving Private Ryan, who's running around and, you know, you two go over there and you two do this. And the reality is that leadership is often much less sexy than that. And it's much more like gardening. It's creating opportunities for people to grow, and where the plants aren't fighting with each other or vying for sun or blocking each other's sun and so on. So I think it's a great observation about leadership, team.
One of the things I find myself saying to the previous Accelerate Prize cohorts is to give people visualization, and I use layers of management, right? And it just, organizations grow. And so you start off with a simple one person, right? Okay, well, you know, you're the gardener, you're doing all the work. And now you grow to be 3 to 5 people, somewhere between 8, right? I just use, if you have 7 direct reports, then at 8 people, you have to become a 2-tiered organization. And then someone has to be the team lead, right? And so just so many startups, at some point, okay, someone's got to be the CEO. You might start off with an egalitarian model where 3, okay, we're all just equals, but at 8 people, someone's got to go take the lead, just from a team dynamic standpoint. And then you get to a 3-tiered, right? And what you find is if you're the person at the top, you're going to get more distant from the problem. And if you're really good, you could probably understand what everybody's doing 2 layers below you. But one day you find out, and usually about like 100, 150, right? You find out that you're a 4-tiered organization. And you've got to take everything you're doing, you got to push it down a level. And then you got to wake up and says, okay, if I'm not doing anything I'm doing because I just pushed it down a level, what do I do? Well, your job is to manage that layer that's doing what you used to do. And we're going through like another layer right now where I can see there's a whole set of decisions that used to be at my staff level is no longer appropriate at my staff level, but the behaviors were like, we're still problem solving ourselves. And we had a transition to say, well, you got to stop problem solving. We got to ask who actually owns that issue. And do we have the right organizational structures and alignment set up for that? Right. And it just winds up being a very, very different muscle.
One of the best lessons I ever learned in that was probably from the worst boss I ever had, who will go nameless, but I ironically learned many good lessons from my worst boss. So if you have a bad boss, you can probably learn a lot from them. But one of the lessons was, especially in a large organization, you manage the top and you manage the bottom. And managing the bottom means staying connected to the front line. Yeah. I spent a lot of my time staying connected to frontline employees because you'll hear the truth from them. Yeah. They're not experienced managers who are good at bullshitting and telling the stories that they think managers want to hear and managing up and all that. Your frontline employees, they will often, if you're a good person and you take the time to actually meet with the frontline of your company, you will learn a lot. So that's great advice on layers.
What are you doing about that right now, right? Because like it used to be that you walk the halls, you get sales calls, right? You go out in the field and you hang out with dinners and bars and you hear all sorts of stuff. Now you're stuck at home.
Yeah.
I've
tried a couple things. I'll tell you what I'm doing. I've tried a couple things. So first I tried doing office hours. And the problem is I had like 50 people on the Zoom. Yeah. It was like, Friday, 10 to 11, open Zoom, anyone can join. And then it's just like a free for all and it's not productive. And also no one's going to really be honest with 50 other people on the line. So it was useless. So we didn't do that anymore. Then I'm using an app called Donut. It's not a great name, but what it is it's attempting to manufacture serendipity. So we put it in a Slack channel, and I told all the employees, you can join this Slack channel. Me and my staff are in the Slack channel, and every week or two, you can set the frequency. It makes a random introduction. Yeah. And then it creates a Slack channel for the two people and says virtual coffee. Yeah. So today I had a virtual coffee with someone who I've met twice in my company, don't know very well. And it was literally like just sitting at the cafe in the headquarters and having coffee. There was no agenda. And I learned a bunch about what the heck's going on in the company. It was awesome. So that's one way that I'm doing it. The other way is I've got a 24/7 Ask Me Anything channel in Slack. So employees just ask me anything. I found that to be more effective in the beginning. People had pent up questions. I don't really get that many questions on that. So then the last thing I do is I send a weekly email, just a simple weekly email. And I ask questions and I get direct responses from employees. Those are the three things I do.
Opportunities for startups.
Exactly.
Donut's a startup. Yeah.
Donut, they are a startup. Yeah, and we're using them. Highly recommend. What do you do? Last question. Morning routine. What do you do to de-stress? Do you meditate? Or you seem like a super calm, chill dude. How do you maintain your youthful appearance and the seeming lack of stress? How do you do that?
Yeah, I have my sleepless nights, certainly, right? Like any other job, any other role. I started wearing a heartbeat monitor, just kind of monitor it, and my heart rate's pretty good. And so, but I can say, okay, why is it like spiking right now? And just a bit more aware of it. I think two things, right? I think the power of routine is really, really important. And when your routine got destroyed because you're just, there's this funny New Yorker article where it's one of these animated GIFs where it's just, you're in bed and the bed kind of flips over and now you're just sitting at your desk, right? And there's like between your bed and your desk.
I love that.
So I do have a routine where I go in the mornings with my cold coffee, right? Where I do my pour over, take time.
Nice.
And, but it's, it's a routine that you do. I grind the beans, right? And then I do try to say, look, if I'm not commuting, let's make productive use of it. So I am starting to jog a lot more.
Nice. And you got plenty of hills to hit. Plenty of hills.
A lot of hills in Telegraph Hill. Yeah.
Very nice. Well, I think we're at 6:20 now, so it's been a great chat. I'd love to get to some of the questions that we have on the chat here. So we have a few that have been posted. Maybe I'll just I'll pick a couple. Olivia.
I can pull out some here, Rowan, to make it easy for you.
Yeah, want to pull them up and do the Q&A for us?
Yeah, so love the conversation. Really excited to get some of these questions answered from the chat. So you guys both spent a little bit of time talking about, how you're building trust with your teams, helping them find the floor. Rowan, you're doing these Ask Me Anythings, the donut coffees. A couple of the founders in the channel mentioned that, when it comes to early stage startups, they entered this period of uncertainty with maybe very little credibility, not a ton of presence. And now they're in this situation where they're building new relationships and building, their pipeline or doing business development over Zoom or remotely. So do you guys have any recommendations for startup founders who are kind of spearheading their sales or business development at these early stages amidst all this uncertainty?
Take it till you make it.
Yeah.
I've been there. One of the biggest mistakes that I made, I learned it as a lesson early on, was I looked at other people who were super polished and experienced and thought they must have been born with that. And, I don't have that. And how can I ever be like that? And the most successful ones that I ever found, I eventually realized that the best ones were actually just being themselves, and they had a ton of practice. And when I stopped trying to be like them, things got a hell of a lot better. Of course you want to emulate people that you look up to, but it really doesn't work most of the time. And people can see through it and it seems fake. You're just being a bad copy of someone else. My advice to any startup founder who's struggling with that is be yourself. And, people recognize you're working at a startup and you may not have all the experience, but if you're totally honest and truthful to yourself, people love that too. They love humanity more than anything else.
Practice. Yeah, that's a great answer. It's just practice.
It'll come with practice.
Figure it out.
I'm sure that's not the easy trick everyone wanted, but is really the reality in terms of building that skill. So
okay,
Tien, this question is
here's a trick.
A trick. Oh yeah.
A quick trick. Make your notes, put them in your notepad, and stick them right underneath the camera at the top of your computer. So as you're, and then you scroll, so the line you need to read is right at the top of the monitor. That way, it looks like you're looking right at the screen, but you're reading your points and you can remember stuff. There you go. I do that one. When I do Jim Cramer, I do that sometimes on CNBC.
Yeah, when I do Cramer, I memorize. I memorize about 5 to 10 points. And then no matter what question he asks, I try to bring it back to one of my 5 or 10 points.
There you go. That's a good technique. I'll be on Cramer on Monday, so we'll see how that goes.
Oh, that's a good one. And a good trick for specifically for Zoom. Obviously, we can't be doing that if we're face to face and have our notes up here. So
yeah, exactly.
a good hack for the Zoom age. So Tien, this one is specifically for you. So I know you mentioned that you guys are seeing kind of an uptick in industries like manufacturing. So some people in the audience are curious, where do you really see, future opportunities? Someone mentioned, is a business like legal ready for subscription billing? Where do you kind of see the future of the subscription economy going?
So I'm going to reframe the question, right? It's that thing of thinking it backwards. I want the market to tell me when it's ready. And so like, if you look at the book that we wrote, we talked about all these industries. One of the industries we wrote about was retail. And we weren't seeing any real sales activity in retail, right? But we can see that it should change. And so we just started telling all these stories of how retail should change. And then we just sort of sit back and see which ones stick and which ones don't. And so it's our way of just putting, an ear in the marketplace or ear on the ground and seeing what people say. Now we're actually seeing retail start to move, finally, probably just because they're so demolished. Even though it's been like, a 20-year decline ever since Amazon, started. And so I would rather do that, right? I would rather have a vision of what it's going to be and then finding ways to really listen to the marketplace and then just being able to react really quickly. So legal, I think legal should absolutely be in it, but then you can say, well, why aren't they moving faster? Because their structural dynamics are such that they still get away with billing per hour. And until there's a disruption in that model, they don't have a lot of great incentives to change.
That makes sense. And I think that's something that carries over to all founders who are thinking about, how do their products serve customers better, is listening to those markets and those customers and having them tell you versus trying to wedge a solution into a problem that doesn't exist.
Right.
So we have one last one for both of you too. So what has been one aspect of COVID or this global pandemic working from home that has had the most positive impact on your company or your work?
There actually is a lot. What's the most positive? I think maybe I'll say it this way. You don't really like we're all startups. We all have a SaaS product, and one of the worst moments in a SaaS company is the system is down, right? Like your CTO, your head of ops calls you like, we have a hard failure, and you're like, oh my god, right?
Heart palpitations right now.
Yeah, exactly. The next 48 hours is just going to be tough. But strangely enough, it's in hindsight, it's those moments, and the customers kind of watch you and see how you act, and those are actually moments, like, you don't wish those moments, but those are moments where you can actually build extreme trust and goodwill, because people understand that stuff happens, right? But how are you acting? Are you being transparent, and do you have their back?
Yeah.
And so these moments like this is kind of an extreme reset. And so maybe because it's a founder thing, my mind often just starts to kick into higher gear in terms of, well, that's interesting, right? There's a whole unknown situation. There's a blank sheet of paper. and there's a chance to, you know, if there's something that you've been struggling with and you wanted to change, all right, well, this is like a great chance, right?
Yeah.
A great time to drive those type of changes.
Yeah, for me, that's a great great insight. I don't want to have an outage, but if I do, I want to learn from it. You know, for me, that reminds me of a talk I heard once from the dean of HBS, and he had looked at all of these companies and was looking at sort of political infighting and politics and business. And of course, for a lot of our sort of founders, they're running small companies. As you get bigger, the adage is, you know, you're going to get more politics because you get more people and more layers and so on. But he found one place in America that didn't have politics, and that was the emergency room. And when he went and interviewed people that worked in the emergency room and sort of tried to figure out why this was, the answer was because they didn't have time for it, because they were constantly dealing with emergencies. And that sort of led to, you know, that leads to this idea of never waste a good emergency. COVID-19 has been a great emergency for my business to rally the organization around. And we've seen our employee engagement scores go up. Even though we're all working remotely, we're not seeing each other, you would expect the opposite, that, you know, hey, engagement's going to go down because people aren't seeing each other and, you know, hanging out. And it did the opposite. Our engagement went up. And it's been this great galvanizing event to bring people together in the organization. And our business has done very well through the crisis, but I know equally, you know, I talked to other CEOs whose businesses haven't done well, and it's equally pulled them together. And there's learnings in both. So I think that's a good lesson and a positive outcome of COVID. It has actually brought my company together more. It's actually given me an opportunity to meet more of my employees, to learn more about them, not just COVID, but also the Black Lives Matter movement, and the murder of George Floyd has given me an opportunity to connect with more of my employees and talk about deeper issues than we ever did before. And that's hugely positive, I think, in making us a stronger company.
That's right.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Rowan and Tien, for spending time with us tonight. Thank you, everyone who joined us on this Tuesday evening. If you are an early stage B2B SaaS founder, we would love to talk to you. You can visit us at accelerprise.vc to learn more about our accelerator and fund. And if you are a corporate innovation leader who's looking to connect with startups and drive some of your open innovation initiatives, we'd love to talk to you as well. You can visit us also on our website. Thank you, Rowan. Thank you, Tien. Have a great Tuesday, everyone.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Rowan.
Thanks, team. Thanks, Olivia.
Bye, guys.